Have you ever built a life so carefully, brick by perfect brick, only to realize you were living in a house of cards? I did. And I watched it all come down. This isn't a story about the end of a marriage. It's about the demolition that had to happen before I could find the foundation for a real home, and the woman I was always meant to be. It's the story of how I stopped surviving and started living, not in spite of my family breaking apart, but because of it. For years, I was the keeper of a picture-perfect life. On the outside, we were the family everyone wanted to be. Our life was a carefully curated collection of moments designed for public consumption. You've seen them. The sun-drenched photos on Instagram from our beach vacations, the 2 kids smiling in matching outfits, my husband's arm draped casually around my shoulder. Our home in the suburbs was a monument to this illusion. Every room spotless, every throw pillow perfectly fluffed. The birthday parties were legendary, with themes executed down to the last detail, from the handcrafted invitations to the custom-baked cakes. I was the architect of this perfection, the tireless director behind the scenes. But inside those pristine walls, it was a house of cards. The silence between my husband and me was a physical presence, a deafening roar that no argument could ever match. It was a heavy blanket that smothered every room, making the air thick and hard to breathe. I became a master of pretense, an Oscar-worthy actress in the long-running drama of my own life. I learned to smile through a hollow ache in my chest. I pretended not to see the growing distance in his eyes, the way they'd look right through me, as if I were a ghost haunting the hallways of our home. I pretended I didn't feel the vast, empty space in our bed, a cold canyon that grew wider with each passing night. I pretended we were still a team, partners navigating life together, when in truth, we were just 2 strangers sharing a mortgage and a last name. And I had the noblest justification, the one that absolved me of all responsibility to my own happiness, the one that let me sleep at night. I was doing it all for them. For my kids. My mantra was a constant, desperate whisper that played on a loop in my mind: a broken home breaks a child. I'd read it in magazines, heard it from well-meaning friends, seen it play out in cautionary tales. That fear was an anchor, a 1,000-pound weight tied to my soul, keeping me stuck and drowning in a vast sea of my own unhappiness. I believed with every fiber of my being that my sacrifice was the ultimate proof of my unconditional love. I was willing to be invisible, a ghost in my own life, to erase my own needs and desires, so that my children could have the one thing I thought mattered most: a mother and a father living under the same roof. I saw my unhappiness not as a failure but as a badge of honor, a testament to my strength as a mother. Until the day the truth didn't just knock politely. It kicked the front door off its hinges. It wasn't a loud cinematic explosion. There was no dramatic confrontation in the rain. It was a quiet click, the sound of my world fracturing. It was a stray text message on his phone, left open on the nightstand, a message from a name I didn't recognize that was far too familiar. It was a credit card bill I found while looking for a receipt, showing charges for hotels in our own city, for dinners I was never invited to. It was the coldness in his touch that finally had a name, a reason. The discovery of the affair wasn't just a broken promise. It was the complete and utter demolition of my life's purpose. The beautiful, perfect life I had so carefully curated, the sacrifice I had made my identity, was a lie. I hadn't been shielding my children from a wound. I had been living inside of it, and I was dragging them down into the darkness with me. The foundation of my perfect house wasn't just cracked. It was non-existent. The pain was a physical force. It felt like my ribs were cracking, like my lungs couldn't draw in enough air. It was a tidal wave of grief, betrayal, and humiliation that threatened to pull me under for good. But in the middle of that suffocating chaos, as the debris of my former life settled around me, something else began to rise from the rubble. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was clarity. It happened when I looked into my 8-year-old daughter's eyes and saw my own deep, weary sadness reflected back at me. She had learned my smile, the one that didn't quite reach the eyes. It happened when my son, with the brutal, beautiful honesty only a child can possess, came to me while I was washing dishes, my back turned to him, and asked, "Mom, why don't you smile for real anymore?" His small voice cut through the noise of my own agony. In that moment, the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The example I was setting wasn't one of noble sacrifice. It was one of quiet submission. I was teaching my daughter that a woman's happiness is negotiable, that she should settle for less than she deserves to keep the peace. I was teaching my son that it was acceptable to be blind to a woman's pain, to live alongside it and pretend it wasn't there. The fear of leaving for them was suddenly, completely eclipsed by the sheer terror of staying for them. I had to show them what it looked like to fight for yourself. The decision to leave was the single, most terrifying and courageous act of my life. It was a leap into a black, unknown abyss. The nights were the worst, filled with a suffocating guilt that whispered I was a failure, that I was selfishly destroying my children's lives. The legal battles were a soul-crushing exercise in reducing a life shared into assets and liabilities. And then there was the crippling, paralyzing fear of the future, of being alone, of being solely responsible for these two small, precious lives. There were days the only thing that kept me moving was the relentless rhythm of the school run, the simple, mechanical act of getting them where they needed to be. I felt shattered, a broken mosaic of the woman I used to be. I saw the pity in the eyes of other parents at pickup. I was now a statistic, a label, the divorced mom, the head of a broken family. But slowly, painfully, in the quiet of my new, much smaller apartment, surrounded by boxes I didn't have the energy to unpack, I started picking up the pieces of myself. And I realized they didn't fit together in the same way anymore. They couldn't. The woman who emerged from that wreckage wasn't the same one who had fallen. I learned how to change a flat tire on the side of the road in the pouring rain, my hands covered in grease, feeling a surge of pride I hadn't felt in a decade. I learned how to manage my own finances, creating a budget and sticking to it, finding security in my own capability. I learned how to find a profound and peaceful joy in my own company, to sit in silence without feeling the pressing weight of loneliness. I discovered a strength I never knew I had, a deep, primal resilience that had been forged in the very fires I thought would consume me. The biggest transformation, though, was not in my newfound independence, but in my motherhood. Free from the constant, suffocating tension, free from the web of lies and pretense, I became a more present, more authentic, and infinitely happier mother. Our small apartment, which at first felt like a symbol of my failure, became a sanctuary. Our laughter became louder, echoing off the walls, genuine and unforced. Our hugs were tighter, more real, filled with the unspoken truth that we were a team. I showed them that life can knock you down, that things can fall apart, but you can always, always get back up and build something new, something even more beautiful and true. The grand house that had crumbled made way for a real home. A home built not on a fragile foundation of obligation and appearance, but on the solid, unshakable pillars of respect, honesty, and self-love. Today, I am not the woman who survived a divorce. I am the woman who was set free by it. The immense pain was not the end of my story, it was the midwife to my rebirth. The ashes of my marriage, the remnants of that picture-perfect life, weren't a wasteland. They were the fertile soil where I finally learned to bloom. And the greatest, most important lesson I ever taught my children wasn't how to keep a family together at any cost. It was how to have the courage to fight for your own happiness, because one whole, joyful mother is worth more to a child than two parents, living as hollow, unhappy halves. It's funny, isn't it? How the most life-altering journeys can begin in the most ordinary of places. Before the house of cards, before the deafening silence, and the carefully curated life, there was a beginning. And for the longest time I held on to that beginning, like a holy relic, proof that what we had was once real, once beautiful. We met at a party. It wasn't a glamorous event. It was a typical post-college affair in a cramped third-floor apartment that smelled of stale beer and cheap pizza. The music was too loud, the air was too thick, and everyone was trying so hard to be interesting. I remember feeling a little lost in it all, leaning against a wall, nursing a plastic cup of something I couldn't identify, just watching the chaos unfold. And then I saw him. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. In fact, he was the opposite. He was in a corner, locked in a conversation with our mutual friend, and he was listening. Really listening. Not just waiting for his turn to speak, but leaning in, his expression open and engaged. In a room full of noise and performance, he was a pocket of quiet sincerity. He looked over, and our eyes met for just a second, and he gave this small, genuine smile. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't a pickup line in visual form. It was just warm. Like he saw me, the girl feeling awkward by the wall, and was offering a moment of connection. Later that night, when we finally talked, I felt that same sense of calm. Talking to him felt like coming home after a long, loud day. I felt safe. And for a girl in her early 20s, trying to figure out the world, that feeling was everything. Back then, he was a man made of promises. Not the flashy, empty kind, but the quiet, steady ones. He had this blueprint for his life, a future he was building, with a calm, unshakable confidence. He talked about his career goals, about wanting a family, about a house with a big backyard. It wasn't just talk. You could feel the intention behind his words. He was driven, but his ambition was softened by this incredible thoughtfulness. He'd remember the name of a book I'd mentioned wanting to read, and show up with it a week later. He'd call after a date, not text, just to say he had a great time. He was the kind of man who made you believe in the good guys, the ones who do what they say they will. He made me feel cherished, seen, and profoundly secure. He was the solid ground beneath my feet. I think the moment I knew, the moment I let myself believe in, forever, was about 6 months in. We took a spontaneous weekend trip to the coast. It was one of those perfect autumn days that felt like a gift. The plan was to hike, to explore the little town, to have a romantic dinner. But the sky had other ideas. The moment we stepped out of the car, the heavens opened up. A cold, relentless downpour that soaked us to the bone in seconds. I remember my first reaction was disappointment. The perfect weekend. Ruined. But he just started laughing. A deep, joyful laugh that echoed in the empty street. He grabbed my hand and said, "Come on!" And we just ran. We ran through the rain, splashing in puddles like little kids, until we found this tiny, old-fashioned diner with a flickering neon sign. We sat in a booth, shivering, our clothes dripping onto the cracked vinyl seats, and ordered 2 black coffees and a slice of apple pie to share. The whole place smelled like coffee and cinnamon. And as we sat there, sharing this one piece of pie with 2 forks, our hair plastered to our faces, laughing so hard we could barely breathe, he looked at me. The laughter faded from his eyes and was replaced with something so deep, so certain. He reached across the table and tucked a wet strand of hair behind my ear. And he said, very quietly, This is what I want. Even the ruined plans are perfect with you." In that moment, in that little diner, surrounded by the sound of the rain, I saw our whole future. And it was beautiful. It was a promise of a life where even the storms would be an adventure we'd face together, laughing. That was the foundation I thought we were building on. Solid. Real. Unbreakable. That diner, that rainy afternoon, it wasn't a turning point so much as an arrival. We had found our destination in each other. After that, there were no more questions. The transition from dating to being engaged felt as natural and inevitable as breathing. It wasn't a whirlwind. It was a settling. A deep, quiet, joyful settling into the certainty that this was my person, my home. The proposal came 8 months later. It wasn't on a jumbotron or at a 5-star restaurant. It was us. It was a Saturday in October, the air crisp with the smell of fallen leaves. We had spent the day doing what we loved most, nothing and everything. We went to the farmer's market, bought too many apples, and then went for a long drive with no destination, the windows down and the music playing just a little too loud. We ended up at a lookout point we discovered on one of our first dates, a small, grassy overlook with a single wooden bench that faced the entire valley. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and deep violet. We sat on that bench, sharing a thermos of hot cider, not saying much, just watching the world turn colors. It was a comfortable silence, the kind you only share with someone who knows the rhythm of your soul. He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the sunset. There was no big speech. He just took my hand, his palm warm and familiar against mine. He said, "I never knew what my life was supposed to look like until I saw it with you in it. Every plan, every dream, it starts and ends with you." He slid off the bench onto one knee, pulling a small, simple box from his jacket pocket. "I don't want to just have perfect moments with you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to build a whole life of them, even the ruined ones." He opened the box, and inside was a ring, simple and classic. It wasn't about the diamond, it was about the look in his eyes, a look that promised forever. And in that quiet, perfect moment, with the whole world spread out before us, I said yes. It was the easiest word I had ever spoken. Our first few years of marriage were a blueprint in motion. We were architects of our future, drawing up the plans with late-night conversations whispered in the dark. We bought a small starter home, a little bungalow with good bones and a desperate need for fresh paint. Our weekends were a blur of hardware stores, paint rollers, and takeout pizza eaten on the floor because we hadn't bought a table yet. I remember one Saturday we spent the entire day trying to hang wallpaper in the nursery to be. It was a disaster. The paper bubbled, the patterns didn't line up, and we ended up covered in sticky paste, laughing so hard we were crying. In the end, we ripped it all down and just painted the walls a soft, hopeful yellow. That room was a canvas for our dreams. We talked endlessly about the life we would build within those walls. He was climbing the ladder at his firm, working long hours, but it felt like a shared mission. His success was our success. We dreamed of 2 kids, a boy and a girl. We'd have a dog, a golden retriever, of course. We'd host Thanksgiving for our families. Our home filled with noise and warmth, and the smell of roasting turkey. We planned summer road trips in a station wagon, Christmases with a real tree that touched the ceiling. It was a beautiful, conventional dream, but it was ours. And for a while, it felt like we were building it flawlessly, beam by perfect beam. We were a team. Everything we did together. We were laying the foundation, stone by solid stone, for that forever he had promised me on the hill. The peak, the moment when that foundation felt like it was made of solid granite, strong enough to withstand anything, was the day our son was born. I can still feel the sterile chill of the hospital room, smell the antiseptic, hear the rhythmic, reassuring beep of the monitor. After hours of labor, of him holding my hands so tightly, our knuckles were white, of him whispering encouragement in my ear when I thought I couldn't go on, there was a sudden, miraculous silence. And then, a cry. A tiny, furious, beautiful cry that filled the entire universe. The nurse placed our son on my chest, this small, warm, wrinkled creature. And I looked up at my husband. He was standing by the bed, his face a mess of tears and awe. He wasn't looking at the baby, he was looking at me. And the love in his eyes in that moment, it was everything. It was gratitude, and wonder, and a depth of connection that felt sacred. He gently touched the baby's head with one finger, then leaned down and kissed my forehead, his tears falling on my cheek. He whispered, "You did it. Look what we made. He's perfect." Later that night, long after our families had come and gone, it was just the 3 of us in the quiet dark of the room. Our son was asleep in a small bassinet by the bed. My husband had pulled a chair close, and he had his head resting on the edge of my mattress, his hand resting over mine. He was exhausted, but he wouldn't leave. He just stayed there, watching me, watching our son. In the dim glow of the hallway light, I looked at this little family we had created. My husband, my son, and me. In that quiet room, everything was still. The world outside, with all its noise and complications, didn't exist. There was only the gentle rise and fall of our baby's chest, the steady warmth of my husband's hand, and a feeling of such profound, overwhelming love that it felt like my heart might actually burst. This, I thought, is it. This is the pinnacle. This is the forever. A home built, a family started, a love so solid and real you could hold it in your arms. It was the most beautiful moment of my life, and I believed with everything I had that it was just the beginning. You know, it's strange. You don't notice a foundation cracking all at once. It's not an earthquake. It's a series of tiny, almost imperceptible tremors that you dismiss. You tell yourself, it's just the house settling. You learn to walk around the parts of the floor that creak the loudest. The tremors started after our daughter was born. Our son's arrival had been our pinnacle. The moment we became a true family unit, our daughter's arrival should have completed the picture. And it did, for the world outside. But inside, it marked a shift. The team of two that had painted nursery walls and dreamed up a future together became a company. He was the CEO, out in the world, making the big moves. And I was the COO of the domestic division, managing the day-to-day, a role that was essential but somehow, silently, demoted. His work became all-consuming. The long hours bled into longer nights. The shared mission we once talked about became simply his career. The late-night whispers about our dreams were replaced by the heavy sound of his exhaustion as he fell into bed, his back already turned to me. Our conversations became logistical exchanges, stripped of all intimacy. Did you sign the permission slip? The car needs gas. Can you pick up my dry cleaning on Thursday? We were roommates running a small, complicated business called Family. I tried. God, I tried. I'd plan date nights, and he'd cancel at the last minute because of a work emergency. I'd wait up for him, wanting to connect, to hear about his day, and he'd walk past me with a tired sigh, grab a beer from the fridge, and collapse in front of the TV, the blue light a wall between us. The man who once saw a ruined weekend as a perfect adventure now saw my attempts at connection as an obligation. I remember one evening so clearly. The kids were little, maybe 4 and 2. I'd made his favorite dinner. I'd managed to get the kids fed, bathed, and into their pajamas. The house was, for a brief moment, peaceful. He came home, dropped his briefcase by the door, and sat down at the table. I put a plate in front of him, and he picked up his fork with one hand and his phone with the other, and he just scrolled. He ate an entire meal without looking up once. I was talking, telling him a funny story about our son, and I just trailed off mid-sentence. He didn't even notice. I wasn't there, the kids weren't there. It was just him and the endless, silent stream of information on his screen. In that moment, I felt a loneliness so profound, it was like a physical ache in my chest. I felt invisible. When I would try to breach the wall, when my loneliness would spill over into tears of frustration, he had a new weapon, justification. You have no idea the pressure I'm under to provide for this family, he'd say, his voice laced with a weary accusation. It was a brilliant, cruel tactic. It made my need for emotional connection seem selfish, a luxury we couldn't afford. It painted me as ungrateful for the beautiful house and the perfect life he was working so hard to maintain. He wasn't just distant. He was making me feel guilty for wanting him to be close. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound anymore. It was a punishment. Then the smaller, sharper tremors began. His phone, which had once been left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket, or placed screen down on the nightstand. He started taking calls outside, pacing on the patio in the dark. It's a work thing, he'd say. Don't want to wake the kids. Business trips became more frequent, with itineraries that were frustratingly vague. A deep, cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. It was a constant companion, an instinct I was trying desperately to ignore. Because acknowledging it meant acknowledging that the entire structure of my life, the very purpose I had built for myself, was in jeopardy. And the fear of that was more terrifying than the truth itself. The end didn't come with a bang. It came on a Tuesday night, a completely ordinary, forgettable Tuesday. The kids were asleep, the dishwasher was humming. I was gathering laundry from the hamper in our bedroom, and he was in the shower. His phone was on the nightstand, charging. It lit up. Not with a call, but with a text preview on the lock screen, a name I didn't know, and just 6 words. Thinking of you, last night was amazing. Time stopped. The sound of the shower, the hum of the dishwasher, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. My blood ran cold. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to steady myself on the dresser. It was like the world had tilted on its axis, and I was sliding off. This wasn't a tremor. This was the earthquake. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at those 6 words. They were the key that unlocked everything. The late nights, the business trips, the phone calls on the patio, the emotional distance. It all snapped into focus with brutal, sickening clarity. The coldness finally had a name. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I felt nothing, a profound and terrifying emptiness. I picked up the laundry basket, walked downstairs, and put a load of whites in the washing machine. I measured the detergent. I added the fabric softener. I pressed the start button. I remember watching the clothes tumble through the small glass window, over and thinking, this is what my life is. A lie, spinning on a rinse cycle. When he came downstairs, dressed in his pajamas, smelling of soap, he found me sitting on the sofa in the dark. He flicked on a lamp. Everything okay? He asked, his voice casual. And I just looked at him, the man I had met at a party. The man who had promised me a lifetime of perfect moments, even the ruined ones. The father of my children. And I saw a stranger. I didn't have to say a word, he saw it in my eyes. The knowledge. The end. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He just sat down in the armchair across from me, the space between us a chasm that would never be crossed again. And in that deafening, soul-crushing silence, I watched the house we had built together, brick by perfect brick, crumble into dust around me. That silence in the living room stretched for what felt like a lifetime. It was a thick, heavy thing, absorbing all the sound in the house, all the years we had spent together. He just sat there, in his armchair, a statue of a man I used to know. The casual question, everything okay? Still hung in the air, a monument to his denial. Finally he spoke. His voice was low, devoid of emotion. So, what now? It wasn't a question of remorse. It wasn't an apology. It was a logistical inquiry. And that was the final straw. It wasn't the affair itself that broke me. It was the complete and utter absence of care in the aftermath. It was the realization that he wasn't just unfaithful, he was indifferent. The love wasn't just gone, it had been erased so completely that he couldn't even perform the courtesy of pretending to be sorry. I looked at him, really looked at him, and the last flicker of the man I married, the boy who laughed in the rain, was gone. Now? I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady, a stranger's voice coming from my own throat. Now it's over. The word hung in the space between us. It didn't feel real. He just nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on some distant point over my shoulder. I see. And then I said it, the word that had been my greatest fear, the word I had built my entire life around avoiding. I want a divorce. I expected him to argue, to fight, to say something, anything. Instead, he just let out a long, slow breath, a sigh of what sounded, terrifyingly, like relief. As if I had finally lifted a burden from his shoulders. He looked at me, a flicker of something. Pity, maybe, in his eyes. Okay, he said. If that's what you want. And in that moment, he made the decision mine. The final, cruel act of a man abdicating all responsibility. I was the one breaking our family. He was just a passive participant. The days that followed were a masterclass in emotional whiplash. We were ghosts haunting the same house, moving through rooms without acknowledging each other, our silence punctuated only by the necessary, clipped exchanges about the kids. I'll get them from school today. They need to pack for their swimming lessons. He slept in the guest room. The vast, empty space in our bed was no longer a metaphor. It was a cold, stark reality. Telling my parents was like confessing a failure. I could hear the disappointment in my mother's voice, the careful, measured questions designed to see if it could be fixed, salvaged. Are you sure you've tried everything? She asked, and I felt a fresh wave of shame wash over me. Friends divided themselves into camps, some offering sympathy, others offering platitudes that felt like tiny paper cuts. Everything happens for a reason, they'd say, and I wanted to scream. The process itself began with a chilling civility. We agreed to try mediation, to keep things amicable for the kids. Our first session was in a sterile office with beige walls and a large mahogany table that felt like a battlefield. The mediator was a kind-faced woman who spoke in calm, gentle tones as she walked us through the process of dismantling our life. We sat on opposite sides of that table, two strangers dividing up a shared history. The house, the car, the retirement accounts, the photograph albums. It was all reduced to a spreadsheet, a column of assets and liabilities. The life we had built with whispered dreams and weekend projects was now just a series of line items to be negotiated. The civility shattered when we got to the custody arrangement. That's when the lawyers got involved, and the language shifted from amicable to adversarial. His narrative was that he was the provider, the stable one, and that my decision to end the marriage was an act of emotional instability. Letters were exchanged, filled with legal jargon that twisted our shared memories into weapons. Every argument we ever had, every moment of weakness I had ever shown, was catalogued and presented as evidence of my unsuitability. It was a soul-crushing, methodical demolition of my character, and all I could do was stand there and watch. The hardest moment, the one that truly brought me to my knees, had nothing to do with lawyers or spreadsheets. It was the night we told the children. We sat them down on the living room sofa, the same one where my world had ended just weeks before. I held my daughter's hand, and he sat beside my son. How do you explain the end of the world to two small people who believe you are their entire universe? I remember the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. Mommy and Daddy have decided that we can't be married anymore, I started, my voice trembling. But we both love you so, so much, and that will never, ever change. We will always be your family. My daughter's face crumpled, her big, brown eyes filling with tears. But where will Daddy live? She whispered. My son, ever the stoic, just stared straight ahead, his little jaw tight. Is it because of me? He asked, his voice barely audible. Did I do something wrong? That question broke me. It shattered the last bit of composure I had. I pulled him into my arms, burying my face in his hair, and just sobbed. No, baby, no. Never. I choked out. This is not your fault. This is about grown-up problems that have nothing to do with you. In that moment, holding my two weeping children, I felt the full, crushing weight of my decision. The guilt was a physical monster, clawing at my throat, telling me I had failed them, that I had broken their perfect little worlds forever. The day I signed the final papers was a gray, overcast afternoon in November. I sat in my lawyer's office, the thick stack of documents on the table in front of me. This was it, the legal end of us. I picked up the heavy pen, my hand shaking slightly. I flipped through the pages. My signature required next to clauses about property division, holiday schedules, and health insurance. Each stroke of the pen felt like a small death, an erasure of a promise. I signed away the house we brought our babies home to. I signed away the future we had planned on that lookout point. I signed away the name that had been mine for 15 years. When I signed the last page, I didn't feel the relief I expected. I felt a profound, hollow emptiness. It was done. I handed the pen back to my lawyer, stood up, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. As I sat in my car in the parking lot, the rain began to fall, streaking down the windshield. I didn't cry. I just sat there, watching the raindrops, feeling utterly and completely alone. The house of cards had fallen. The demolition was complete. And I was standing in the wreckage, with no blueprint, no plans, and no idea how to even begin to build again. The rain on the windshield was the only sound. In the quiet of my car, parked in that anonymous law firm parking lot, I felt the truth of what I had just done. I had legally, officially, irrevocably dismantled my own life. The emptiness I felt wasn't just sadness. It was a vast, echoing void where a future used to be. For the first few months, that void was my new home. I moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment with beige walls and a lingering scent of the previous tenants. The silence in that apartment was different from the silence in my old house. It wasn't heavy with unspoken words. It was thin and sharp, amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock. It was the sound of being utterly alone. Loneliness was a new kind of ghost. It sat with me at the dinner table after the kids were in bed. It laid beside me in a bed that felt impossibly large for one person. There were nights I'd wake up in a panic, my heart pounding, a primal fear gripping me that I had made a terrible, irreversible mistake, that I had traded a quiet misery for an acute, unbearable solitude. The weekends the kids were with their father were the worst. The silence in their empty rooms was a physical weight, a constant, screaming reminder of what I had broken. I would walk through the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, surrounded by happy families, and feel like I was watching the world from behind a pane of glass. I was no longer a part of it. But then, slowly, like the first shoots of grass pushing through scorched earth, something else began to grow in that emptiness. It started with small, almost insignificant moments of freedom. One night, I realized I could watch whatever I wanted on television, without debate or compromise. So I watched 3 hours of a historical drama he would have called boring, and I loved it. Another evening, I ate a bowl of popcorn for dinner, just because I could. I bought a ridiculously bright yellow armchair, a color he would have vetoed in a second, and placed it in the sunniest corner of the living room. Each tiny act was a reclamation, a quiet declaration that this space, this life, was mine now. The real work, the deep healing, didn't happen in those small moments. It happened in a therapist's office, on a comfortable but nondescript couch, where I finally gave myself permission to grieve. Not just for the end of my marriage, but for the woman I had lost along the way. I cried for the years I spent making myself smaller, for the dreams I had packed away, for the voice I had silenced. I learned that the guilt I carried wasn't a sign of my failure, but a symptom of my conditioning. And I started, painstakingly, to unpack it. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from, friends who had known me before I became a wife and mother, and they reminded me of the person I used to be, the one who loved to debate politics, who could spend an entire afternoon in a museum, who laughed from her belly. I started running again, not to lose weight, but to feel the strength in my own legs, to hear the rhythm of my own breath, to prove to myself, mile after mile, that I could carry my own weight. Today my life looks nothing like the one I so carefully curated. The small apartment is no longer a symbol of my failure, it's my sanctuary. The beige walls are now covered in the kids, chaotic, beautiful artwork and photographs of us, real, unposed moments of laughter. My yellow armchair is my favorite spot in the world. My routine is still a whirlwind of school runs, work deadlines, and grocery lists, but the energy underneath it all has changed. It's not fueled by tension and anxiety anymore. It's fueled by a quiet, steady peace. The biggest change, though, is in me. I learned that I am more capable than I ever gave myself credit for. I learned that my own happiness isn't selfish. It is the greatest gift I can give my children. I learned that love isn't about finding someone to complete you, but about finding someone who celebrates your wholeness. And I learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. There is a profound strength in my own solitude, a peaceful self-reliance that I wouldn't trade for anything. People sometimes ask me if I've forgiven him. It's a complicated question. Forgiveness for me isn't about absolving him of his actions. It's not about erasing the pain. It's about accepting the reality of what happened, and then choosing to release its power over me. It's about taking the knife out of my own back, so the wound can finally heal. The most important forgiveness I've discovered was the forgiveness I had to grant myself. Forgiving myself for not knowing better, for staying too long, for believing I didn't deserve more. That was the key that finally set me free. As for the future, for the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't have a blueprint. The idea of a new relationship doesn't scare me, but it doesn't define my search for happiness either. I'm not looking for a new architect for my life. I've learned how to be my own. My focus now is on building a life that feels as good on the inside as it once looked on the outside. It's about being present for my children, about nurturing my friendships, about doing work that matters to me. The future isn't a destination I'm racing toward anymore. It's just this day, this moment, this breath, and the thrilling, beautiful, wide-open possibility of what comes next. If I could go back, if I could somehow reach through time and speak to that woman sitting in her car in the rain, the one who had just signed her life away, I know exactly what I would say. I would kneel down beside her, right there on the wet asphalt of that parking lot. I would look into her terrified, empty eyes, and I would whisper, I know you feel like you failed. I know you think you've just destroyed everything you ever loved, especially your children's future. The guilt is a monster, and right now, it is eating you alive. You are standing in the wreckage of your life, and the fear is so loud it's the only thing you can hear. But listen to me, I'd say, taking her trembling hands in mine. You haven't failed. You have just taken the first, most impossibly brave step towards saving yourself, and in doing so, you are saving them. That pain you feel, the one that's cracking your ribs and stealing your breath, it's not the end, it's the beginning. It's the sound of your own life, your real life, breaking through the concrete you buried it under. This demolition had to happen. You had to tear down the house built on a lie so you could find the ground where a real home could grow. You don't know it yet, I would tell her, but inside of you is a strength you cannot possibly imagine. You are going to learn how to be your own hero. You will build a life, piece by piece, that is honest and true. You will fill your home with so much genuine laughter that it will chase out all the ghosts of that old, deafening silence. And your children? You think you've broken them, but you are about to show them what it means to be whole. You are about to give them the greatest gift a mother can give, a happy mother. And to anyone listening to this right now who might be standing in their own wreckage, living in their own house of cards, paralyzed by that same fear, I want you to hear this. The story we've all been told is wrong. A broken home isn't one where the parents live in two different houses. A broken home is one where there is no love. It's a home where children learn to walk on eggshells, to mistake tension for normalcy, to believe that a woman's happiness is a small price to pay for the illusion of a family. It's a home where a mother's light has been turned down so low she can no longer see herself. Your sacrifice is not what your children need. They need you, the real you. The vibrant, joyful, whole you. They need to see you fight for yourself so they will learn how to fight for themselves. They need to see you choose happiness so they will know they are worthy of it too. Leaving is not the act that breaks your family. It is the act that gives it a chance to breathe again. The journey through the fire is terrifying, but I promise you, on the other side is not a wasteland of ashes. It is fertile ground. It is where you will finally find the foundation for a life that is not just survived, but truly, deeply, and beautifully lived. It is where you will finally come home to yourself.